Patrol Officer Matt Hotzler from the Blue Earth Police Department is working midnight to 8. Dispatch calls him and says they've received a 911 call.
911 emergency. Hello?
That only contained heavy breathing.
Hello, where you at?
And then a hang-up.
At this moment, I wasn't worried. I'd been to 911 hang-up calls before. It was pretty common. I heard a noise that sounded like "help me." I've never heard a "help me" like this. It made the hair on my neck stand up.
It's not somebody screamed an hour ago. Somebody's screaming right now. You put a gun in your hand, and you go in there and find out what's happening.
When I walked in, the main floor was completely empty. I'm standing in the living room. There was a young girl at the top of the stairs. She's got red hair, and she then asked me to come upstairs and help them. I see blood droplets going up the stairs, and I noticed that the red hair wasn't hair dye. It was actually blood. The girl walks into the bedroom to the left. I kind of froze. The bedroom just looked like a horror movie. Blood splatter on the walls. There was blood on the floor. There's a little girl sitting on, looked like a toddler bed mattress, watching cartoons. There was a adult female laying on her back in the bed, covered in blood. And on the right-hand side was an apparent deceased male with extensive head trauma to the point that you knew he was not alive. And then I saw a girl laying at the foot of the bed. And at that point, the adult female reached up and said, "Help my daughter, help my daughter." And while she was saying this, one of her eyeballs slid out of the socket down kind of on her cheek area. At that point, I felt like I was in a nightmare. I have never seen anything to this day that has come close to what I saw in that bedroom.
This is a horrific attack by someone who is absolutely out of control. He is wild. This is different.
I'm Sheriff Mike Gormley with the Faribault County Sheriff's Office. When I got the call from our dispatch, I was at home sleeping. I got dressed and jumped in my truck and headed to the scene. We haven't had very many homicides in Faribault County. It was definitely a oh crap moment, and I wasn't sure what we were going to be dealing with.
I'm Tom Fletcher. I am the Chief of Police for the City of Blue Earth. When this happened, I just remember thinking, we have to preserve the crime scene, so everybody else was out, except for the body upstairs. When Sheriff Gormley showed up at the scene, we informed him of what happened.
They informed the sheriff that this entire family, with one exception, has been attacked in a savage way. One is dead, an adult male, 37 years of age, and his name is Christopher Fulmer. The surviving victims, at least at the moment, are his girlfriend, Candace Freeman, and her 3 children. 38-year-old Candace Freeman is near death at the hospital. A 15-year-old girl and her 19-year-old sister both have fractured skulls. There is also a 6-year-old girl found at the crime scene who is unhurt.
3 victims in there with life-threatening head injuries, and we didn't know they could very well die.
Before Candace passed out, she told the medical people that she had been attacked by someone wearing a black ski mask, and that she and Chris, her boyfriend, were both asleep when the attack began. Everyone's greatest fear.
We entered the house and we were just kind of going slow, just taking a look at, trying to see what we had. I was taking some pictures. There was definitely blood down on the couches and on the floor as we worked our way around. We ended up going upstairs into the bedroom where the assault had happened. Before we entered the victim's bedroom, I had gotten information that the person had been bludgeoned, so in my mind I was already preparing to see that, but it was not enough. Saw the deceased laying there with his head that was very badly damaged, looked like it was bludgeoned with something very heavy.
This is beyond the pale. His head is crushed nearly flat. How many blows would that take? A number. When you kill like this overkill, this savage attack, you don't see this as a criminal act. You see this as administering justice. You need to punish the victim, and you're having a wonderful time doing it.
I haven't seen these pictures in a long time. It's exactly as I remember it. It was so much blood. So much blood.
Next to the deceased victim is the blood-soaked pillow where Candace was sleeping.
You can see here is the little girl's bed. She was 6, and she was sleeping in their room at the time. There's blood on her bed even. It's like a little handprint there of blood.
When the two adults were attacked, how much of that did she actually see? Hard to say.
We thought that this was something that was very cold. Who could do this to kids?
It's always the collateral damage that makes you the most upset sometimes, particularly when it involves a child. I've been there and done that, and it's just awful when you have a little human who is faced with how adults behave. And will always remember it, always be frightened by it.
Breaking into a house, trying to kill everyone in that house is someone not of a regular mindset. Why were the others injured as well, but not as badly? We didn't know.
So they go to the teenage girls' rooms to see if they were attacked in bed. There's no blood in that room, no anything. So the likely scenario is a 6-year-old in total alarm runs out of the master bedroom, goes to get her sisters to say there's something happening. They then come into the master bedroom and probably try to put a stop to it. Then they themselves are attacked and injured, but not as severely as the two in bed. Then the perpetrator leaves.
We weren't exactly sure what we were looking for a murder weapon, but we knew it was something of some weight.
Whatever it is, it's going to be covered in blood and brain tissue.
We had people looking just to try and see if we could find anything, but we did not find the murder weapon.
If he comes here with a weapon, his intention is to use it. And if he removes it, his intention is to perhaps use it again. Is he on his way to somebody else's house? Well, he could be. The worst thing about homicide investigation at the outset is not knowing. Where is he? What is he doing? That's a terrible feeling in your stomach. This person has to be found and neutralized.
When we stepped into the house, the crime scene was like a nightmare.
This has got to be the most horrific crime scene that I've ever seen.
That is a very frightening thing. for the residents of Blue Earth, Minnesota. There is a killer in their midst who did a horrible thing to sleeping residents.
Neighbors living next door to where the homicide took place say they're still trying to come to terms with what happened.
It was very shocking, very tragic.
We were extremely surprised and a little scared when we found out what was exactly going on.
Middle of the night, somebody is killed in their bed. Yeah, that put a lot of people in panic mode. There was fear around town. Who was this and what's next? So we were definitely concerned. We had already called for the BCA to come down and assist us with the crime scene and investigations.
My name is Michael Anderson, and I'm a special agent for the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which is the state crime bureau in Minnesota. And I remember meeting with Sheriff Gormley at the hospital to try to get an update and determine if we can get any more information from the victims about what had happened to them.
But they can't interview them yet. Candace Freeman is in a medically induced coma and may not survive. She has enormous contusions to the brain and multiple skull fractures. Her one eye was destroyed and had to be removed. The teenage girls have non-life-threatening injuries. They expect a full recovery, but they're still being treated.
We thought Chris was definitely the primary target by the amount of blows that he sustained. And our team did some investigating and looking into the background of our victim.
My name is Karen Cawthor. I am Christopher Fulmer's sister. This one right here brings up a lot of memories of him when he was younger. But yeah. Christopher was very smart, witty. He was very spunky, and he liked to joke around a lot. He would always try to cheer you up, make you smile, forget about your problems for a minute. He used to always make me laugh. We used to sit and play Monopoly for hours at a time, and video games, a lot of Nintendo. I think of all the good memories that we had, and at least I got to have him in my life for as long as I did. I received a phone call from my mom saying that Christopher was no longer with us, and I thought she was joking at first. And she said, no, it's the truth. And the hardest day of my life, really. So.
We did discover that he was previously married. He had a son.
At the time he was born, Christopher was so happy, over the moon. Just, yeah, I haven't seen him smile so big in forever. Yeah, he was really excited about it.
He now lives in Blue Earth, Minnesota, because his ex-wife moved there with their son.
He was just here for his son. It was all about his son.
A few months ago, he met Candace Freeman. They have hit it off, and they have become an item.
I know he really loved her. Just all around loved her personality and how caring she was and how good of a mom she was.
So we are concerned about Chris Fulmer's ex-wife, Mary. Ex-partners represent the closest and most emotionally connected person who may develop a real hatred for someone. Could it lead to violence? Without question. It often does.
We had learned that they did have a contentious past.
That's just controlling of my brother. He couldn't talk to people or go out or anything. They just didn't get along that well.
They fought all the time. They had terrible arguments, and the marriage just kind of fell apart.
He had fought for a really long time to get back into his son's life because for some reason she just cut him out and wouldn't let him see him at all.
Now that raises an eyebrow in both the chief and the sheriff. What if the emotions of that still linger in his ex-wife?
I've been involved in cases where we have had contentious custody battles that ultimately resulted in violence and even homicides.
What if Mary allows those emotions to come forward and they begin to eat at her?
The thought of his ex-wife having something to do with what happened to him did cross my mind. I just didn't know what to think at the time.
As far as, the type of perpetrator, it could have been male or it could have been female at that point. We didn't know. We just had Candy's description that it was someone in a mask. That's all we had.
One of the key things we do for investigating crimes is determine do people have an alibi.
When they spoke with Mary, she says she was in another state and where she had been for some period of time. They said, who can confirm that? And she provided them with several names.
We looked into her story. Chris's ex-wife was not in town at the time.
So she's eliminated as a suspect. We need a new one, and we need a new one right now. We need to look at Candace Freeman, who was also savagely attacked. She is married. They are separated, but still legally man and wife. And his name is Brian Freeman.
Initially, you do look into exes or currents. We're not ruling anybody out.
So they want to speak to Brian Freeman. And lo and behold,
I was notified that Brian Freeman had arrived at the hospital.
He's in the waiting room. He's got his 6-year-old daughter with him because she's not hurt at all. Is he there as a caring spouse and father? Or is he there to learn more about the brutal damage he did to his own family? We are about to find out.
Brian seemed to be willing to talk to us. So we find a room that's not being used that we can do an interview with him in.
You can just tell me how you were notified of this incident and what you know.
I had a missed call on my phone, so I picked it up and I seen it was my daughter. I'm sorry, I'm a little shaky.
It's okay.
He appeared to be acting concerned. He was very nervous. But our first impression when Brian showed up was that he had just showered, and that was odd.
The fact that he took a shower before he came in was suspicious. I'm probably going there in my pajamas if I got out of bed. I'm not taking the time to take a shower.
Well, Brian, you can wash away blood, but you can't wash away guilt. So, someone murders Christopher Fulmer in the bloodiest way imaginable. And now Brian Freeman is showing up at the hospital, freshly showered. He doesn't prove anything, but it's awfully suspicious.
We asked him about his situation with Candace and why his family was staying with Chris Fulmer.
Brian says they've been together for 8 years, but they would fight and they would argue. They mutually apparently decided that it's time to move on. So Brian Freeman and Candace are going through a divorce, but it hasn't been completed.
What's been the status of your relationship as of late?
It's pretty good. I guess. We have our arguments.
What are they about?
Most of it's over money.
Okay. Not enough of it?
Yeah, pretty much not enough of it.
Okay. One of the things we look at in a situation like this is we try to alibi out anybody or could have a motive or anything like that or a connection to the people.
He said he had a fireman's dance. He was on the Ceylon Fire Department. He's a volunteer fireman. Ceylon is a small town. It's about a half hour away.
Who else would be some people that would have seen you there?
My fire chief, his wife, and members of my fire department.
After talking with Brian Freeman, they see nothing alarming about his demeanor and nothing alarming about what he had to say.
I gave him my cell phone number and just told him, if anything comes up, just give us a call.
After speaking with Candace's estranged husband, investigators are even more anxious to get a first-hand account from someone who was there during the attack. Luckily, the doctors give them the go-ahead to speak to the 2 teenage daughters. They begin with the 15-year-old daughter.
I woke up to hear my older sister crying and yelling out my mom's name. And then when I got upstairs, I noticed my mom's friends and my mom and my sister's faces covered in blood. And then I blacked out and didn't wake up until I was in the hospital.
When the investigators questioned the eldest daughter, the 19-year-old, she gives a similar story. She said she was awakened by screaming. She ran into the room and saw a man wearing a ski mask was attacking her mother. She went toward him, and she was struck in the head and doesn't remember anything after that. But the investigators learned something interesting. Those girls independently report that they refer to Brian Freeman as Dad. He's been a loving father toward them, but he's actually their stepfather. It turns out that Candace was married once before to their biological father, Richard Messina.
We had learned that he had not had contact with his daughters since 2010. Candace had filed for an order for protection on him because of some allegations of abuse.
Is it possible that Richard Messina decides to attack this family? Humans are capable of any level of violence against any level of victim. If you don't believe that, then you better not be a homicide detective, because you're not going to do very well at it.
We did track down her ex-husband, and he was interviewed at the sheriff's office.
They say, well, Richard, what is the case between you and your ex-wife?
We got married in September 30th of 95 or 96. We were married 5 years. Just right at 6 years, we got our divorce. She tried claiming child abuse on me 3 times in a year. I got a lawyer and that proved her wrong, and I did.
So, have you ever been charged?
No.
There was a contentious relationship there, but I don't feel like it was something that really stood out as like over the top. Like, oh my gosh, this guy's really angry.
He was abiding by the conditions of the OFP. He didn't want to violate that.
Where were you at yesterday?
Yesterday I was at Dawn's place. We didn't leave the house all day.
He had a girlfriend who lived in Dundas, and he was with her all that weekend. He didn't sneak down, take a 2-hour drive to Bloor, take a 2-hour drive back. So we ruled him out as a suspect because he had a rock-solid alibi.
Gormley and Fletcher are running out of leads. They head to the medical examiner's office to determine if perhaps the autopsy can reveal a clue.
When we got the autopsy results back, it showed that Chris had received 11 strikes to his head, causing cerebral damage and ultimately his death.
The type of weapon we were probably looking for, judging by the condition of his head, it was probably a flat handle, a sledgehammer, the back of an axe, something like that to make that chopping smash wound.
The other interesting thing about the autopsy, there are no defensive wounds on Mr. Fulmer. He is killed immediately. But that didn't matter. He doesn't want to just kill him, he wants to erase him. So after that discussion with the coroner, Fletcher returns to something he's been wondering about for some time. Who made the 911 call?
When Matt Hotzler was first dispatched, he was told that there was an open line and they weren't really sure what was going on at the residence.
I called dispatch and I said, hey, would you send me that 911 tape? Because as far as I knew, no one had listened to that 911 tape yet.
911 emergency. Hello?
The original 911 call, there was just kind of a blank air for a while.
Hello, where you at? Hello? Hello?
I remember the hair on my neck just standing up because it was a male's voice who comes on the telephone and he's panting hard. And he said,
"There's been a murder." There's what? Who's this? Can you give me the address?
And then the line goes silent and it's done. Because the dispatcher failed to listen to the male voice, that call got dispatched out incorrectly.
Fletcher realizes that's the killer. The only other male in that building is dead. Whoever killed him made the call.
Hello, can I help you?
The 911 call started out as a mystery, and now it's even more of one.
There's been a murder.
A killer reporting what he's just done. Is he trying to apologize? Is he trying to get medical treatment for these people? Why would the killer make that call?
We had at that time probably 2 BCA agents, the sheriff, and myself working on this. Everybody was out chasing something down.
We had people talking to neighbors, trying to see if they heard anything, saw anything.
We were unsuccessful with the neighbors. Given the time of night, everyone was in bed.
But they talked to Chris's landlord and asked him what he knew about the relationship between Chris and Candace. The investigators learned something interesting.
Chris Fulmer indicated he had been dating a woman who was married, and he was dealing with, I think the term he used was jealous husband issues. So that certainly didn't match up with what Brian Freeman was telling us. He said that the relationship was good and there was no issues or concerns with her spending, the weekend at Chris Fulmer's house.
So that sort of tripped some red flags for us. It wasn't all sunshine and roses like he sort of made it out to be.
Another piece of the puzzle falls into place when the investigators learn more about Candace's family. While her first husband, Richard Messina, is the father of her 2 teenage daughters, her 6-year-old had a different father, Brian Freeman.
The one person that's in the house that doesn't receive any injury and is not attacked in any way is his biological child.
So we were looking at that to try and put that together as far as, is he a possible suspect here? Agent Anderson and I, with that information, decided to go to take another chat with Brian at the hospital in Rochester.
So they start to ask him questions about his alibi of the night in question. And Mr. Freeman begins to be rather vague. He initially said he was at this volunteer fireman dinner in a town 45 minutes away. He suddenly doesn't remember what time it was over. He further adds that people were drinking heavily, and it's possible they wouldn't remember he was there.
He was very shaky and very nervous. It was raising our suspicion with Brian.
Before he left the hospital, I had asked if I could look in his vehicle.
He's somewhat reluctant, but he finally said, yeah, you can search it. The truck, of course, is a mess. A lot of junk and a lot of trash, but they find something that's very interesting indeed.
We were able to find a black ski mask that was very concerning. The daughters said that the person in the house assaulting them was wearing a black ski mask. Brian said that he had those ski masks in his vehicle just because of work, and it's a possibility, but with the circumstances, that just didn't add up. After seeing that, we seized Brian's vehicle, and it was taken back to the sheriff's office and processed by the BCA crime lab.
Brian indicated he was going to go home. His mother was driving him around at that point, and so we had made a decision. We felt it was important to put some surveillance on him. And so I had made contact with one of my colleagues to kind of get in position at Mr. Freeman's house in Ceylon to watch what was going on there.
Eventually, we received a phone call from the agents watching Friedman's residence. They said they witnessed him carry out a black plastic bag and put it into a vehicle. Now, with the things that are going on with your family in the hospital, it was like, why are you taking trash out and putting it inside of a vehicle?
It's not just the trash. It's something he doesn't want the police to see.
At that point, Mike Anderson and I headed over to his house in Ceylon. I think he was a little surprised that we were there. You know, he talked to us again reluctantly. We decided to confront him about the black plastic bag the agents had witnessed him put in the vehicle.
And he said there's just some crap in it. And I said, well, can I take a look at it?
Brian opened up the bag and he pulled out a coat and held it up backwards to us so we could only observe the back. We thought that was a little strange, so we turned it around.
And I remember seeing on the jacket for sure what looked like possible blood stains to me.
Brian immediately says to them, I know what you're thinking, but that's not true. And why is that?
He indicated that he had worked at a hog rendering facility where they butcher or cut up hogs, and that could be pig blood basically on his clothing.
What Brian is saying is very interesting indeed. Do you know how they kill hogs in a slaughterhouse? They hit them over the head with a hammer. Mr. Freeman says that blood is from a slaughtered animal. Well, that might be true in his mind, but I don't think that blood is from a pig.
At that point, I can't let that evidence walk away, right? So I tell him, look, I'd like to take these clothing and have that tested. And if it turns out it's pig blood, that's great.
The BCA lab did a presumptive test to see if it was human or animal blood, and we were told later that it was human blood.
They don't have enough yet to make an arrest. They're close, and they know it. So they subpoena his phone records and read his texts.
What the text messages showed is that Candace and Brian had problems. He's concerned for his marriage in the text messages.
One of his messages, he stated, scared that you're going to leave and not come back. He was worried that Candace was going to leave him for Chris, and he was worried that his daughter was going to be moving away with them as well. We do have motive, definitely, with Brian showing that he was worried about Chris.
At this point, we need to have a more in-depth conversation with him about what his involvement may or may not be in this investigation.
I want to reiterate that you're not under arrest. We want to talk to you about a few things. I'm not going to lie to you, okay? I believe there's some problems with what you've told us. And what Mike and I are asking you to do is be honest with us.
And they start to show him the evidence they have against him, item by item by item.
That's where we pushed on harder, trying to get him to come clean with the real truth of what he did.
I was scared, that's why I didn't really say too much. I wasn't too sure what to say.
And that's when I tried to appeal to him as a firefighter.
Brian's a volunteer fireman in a small town in Martin County. Mike is a volunteer fireman in a small town in Faribault County.
Brian, I'm a fireman too, and you seem like the kind of guy that I wouldn't mind having behind me on the nozzle.
You don't want them to believe they're a cold-blooded killer. Make them believe that you are going to redeem them in some way.
We need to finish this right.
That's it. That's what got Brian to crack.
I honestly didn't go there to hurt anybody. It's one of them impulse things.
So you got out of your car and picked up your warhammer by mistake?
How many times did you swing, do you think?
I'd have to take a guess at 2 or 3 times. I think maybe that's when Candace woke up and got caught in the crossfire.
And then the kids?
I'm thinking they may have come up the stairs, and then they got caught in the crossfire too.
He minimizes the violence. He reports half of it was an accident.
We have a male voice on the 911 call.
This is my voice on the 911 call because I wanted somebody to come and help.
It's certainly not a pure confession, but it will do nicely in combination with the remaining physical evidence.
What happened to that hammer? I think I tossed it out.
He had said he threw that out driving down the highway back to Ceylon and gave kind of an approximate area, like near a bridge. We did later conduct some ground searches of that area, and we were able to recover the hammer on the ground in the ditch.
After talking with Brian Freeman, prosecutors and the investigators all believe they have a fairly clear picture of what really happened that night. They believe that Mr. Freeman had worked himself into a frenzy over the fact that his wife was actually going to leave him for another man. This caused him to become overwhelmed by the emotion of it all.
He parked at the house and sat there mustering up the courage to go up to the house.
He was getting more and more angry, I would suspect, the more time went on, before he finally reached the point where he decided to get out of his vehicle, walk down the street, and made entry into the house.
He walks into this room and he sees his wife is sleeping with another man with his 6-year-old daughter just a few feet away.
At that point, he was blinded with rage. He went over to Christopher's side of the bed and hit him repeatedly with the hammer. Now, he said he probably hit Chris 3 to 4 times. It was a lot more than 3 to 4 times.
He was swinging for the right field wall of Yankee Stadium every time, while his 6-year-old daughter that he loves so much is watching him from 3 feet away. What a lesson to provide your child with.
The evidence showed that after he was done hitting on Chris, he started hitting on Candace.
While this is underway, the 2 older girls come into the bedroom, try to stop him, and he beats them off of him with his hammer, knocking them down. Girls who called you their dad. You fractured their skulls, for God's sake, Brian. You did that. Nobody else, just you.
Approximately 4 days after the incident, Candace came out of her coma.
Police revealed to her who they've arrested for this crime.
She was a little shocked and very emotional that Brian did this to them. After we placed him under arrest, Brian was charged with 2nd-degree homicide.
He entered a guilty plea in a plea agreement.
And he is scheduled to get out of prison in 2045.
It's been hard the last couple months, just thinking about it again. The hardest part for me is not having the closure. So, but I know he knows that I love him, but it's just hard.
In a little town like Blue Earth, it's just hard to believe that that kind of horrendous crime can happen. When I talk to Candace, she remembers something that you shouldn't have to remember. And same with her girls. But they're trying their best to go on with their life. Candace and her girls came to our office they brought us some goodie packages, so it was nice to actually see them up and about and healing quite nicely.
No one wants to believe that someone that they loved is capable of harming them. They really don't. They believe they live in a safe place with safe people, and no one ever does live in a safe place with safe people. On the next American Detective, they can't think of a single reason why someone would want to fill his head with bullets.
So why did you have to shoot him then?
I didn't shoot him.
Yet here he is. He's on the point of boil.
Did you shoot that man?
And boom, boom, boom.
The night Chicago forgot to breathe began with a scream that no one heard. It was a cold October evening in 1992, the kind of cold that seeps into the bones, that clings to brick walls and iron fire escapes, that turns streetlights into pale halos floating above empty sidewalks. The city was restless, restless in the way only Chicago can be, humming with distant sirens, rattling trains, and the low, constant pulse of traffic echoing between narrow alleyways. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, in a quiet residential block on the south side, a young woman vanished without leaving so much as a shadow behind. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 24 years old, a graduate student, a waitress, a daughter, a friend, a woman with a soft voice, a sharp mind, and a habit of walking home alone because she trusted the streets she had grown up on. On that night, she finished her late shift at a small diner near 63rd Street, tied her apron, joked with the cook, and stepped out into the cold, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She never made it back to her apartment 3 blocks away. By morning, her absence had become a question. By noon, it had become fear. By nightfall, it had become a cold case in the making. At first, no one believed anything terrible had happened. Emily was responsible, predictable. She called her mother every Sunday. She texted her roommate if she was running late. She left notes on the kitchen counter, always signed with a small heart. When her roommate woke up that morning and found Emily's bed untouched, she assumed it was a spontaneous sleepover, a late study session, an impulsive decision to crash on a friend's couch. But hours passed. Then more. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, panic had crept into every corner of the apartment. The missing person report was filed at 8:47 p.m. And just like that, Chicago had another ghost. Detectives arrived at the apartment to find nothing out of place. No signs of struggle. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. Emily's purse was missing. So were her keys. Her jacket, however, was still hanging by the door. The only thing gone was Emily herself. Outside, the sidewalk was swept clean by the city's relentless motion. Footprints were erased. Tire tracks blurred into meaninglessness. The rain that had fallen in the early hours of the morning had washed away anything that might have spoken. The street cameras in that neighborhood were unreliable, outdated, and mostly non-functional. The diner had no exterior surveillance. No one recalled seeing her after she stepped out into the night. No one heard a scream. No one saw a struggle. No one noticed a van idling too long or a shadow moving too quickly. Emily Carter simply dissolved into the dark. And in 1992, disappearing without a trace in Chicago was terrifyingly easy. The detectives assigned to the case were seasoned, hardened by years of violence, accustomed to tragedy. Yet something about this disappearance unsettled them. It was too clean, too silent, too complete. Usually, victims left fragments of themselves behind. A dropped shoe, a snapped necklace, a witness who remembered a raised voice, a slamming door, a hurried step. Here, there was nothing. Just a young woman erased between one breath and the next. They retraced her final known steps. From the diner, she would have turned east, crossed the dim intersection, past a row of shuttered storefronts, then cut through a narrow residential street lined with aging brick houses. 3 blocks. A 6-minute walk. A path she had taken hundreds of times. But on this night, that familiar route became a corridor into oblivion. Neighbors were questioned. Doors opened reluctantly. Faces appeared behind chains and half-closed frames. Most said they heard nothing. Some claimed they saw nothing. A few admitted they had been asleep. One elderly man recalled a car door slamming sometime after midnight, but couldn't describe the vehicle. A woman on the corner said she thought she heard footsteps running, but in a city that never stopped moving, such sounds blended into the background like static. The police canvassed hospitals, shelters, and morgues. Her name did not appear on any list. Her face did not match any Jane Doe. Her credit cards were untouched. Her bank account remained frozen in time. It was as if she had stepped out of existence. Within days, flyers flooded telephone poles and bus stops. Emily Carter, missing. Have you seen her? Her photograph stared out from glossy paper, soft brown eyes, dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a hesitant smile that seemed to apologize for taking up space. Friends organized search parties. Volunteers combed vacant lots, alleys, abandoned buildings, riverbanks. Every inch of the neighborhood was scanned, every trash bin overturned, every basement inspected. The search stretched outward, rippling across districts, across boroughs, across county lines. Nothing. As the days turned into weeks, whispers began to circulate. Abduction. Serial predator. Gang violence. Wrong place, wrong time. Theories bloomed and withered in rapid succession, each unable to take root in the absence of evidence. The detectives followed every tip, chased every rumor, knocked on every door. Most led nowhere. Some led to dead ends, so abrupt they felt like walls. And then, 3 weeks after Emily disappeared, the phone rang in the homicide unit. A construction worker on the outskirts of the city had discovered something strange while clearing debris from an abandoned lot near the Calumet River. Half buried beneath rotting plywood and broken concrete, he had seen a scrap of fabric tangled in weeds. When he pulled it free, a chill ran through his spine. It was a woman's scarf. Dark blue, soft wool, hand-stitched initials in the corner. EC. The site was immediately sealed. Floodlights pierced the night. Dogs were brought in. Soil was sifted. The ground was torn open in meticulous layers. For hours, the search yielded nothing more than broken glass, rusted nails, and decades of forgotten trash. But just before dawn, a cadaver dog froze, stiff and alert, at the edge of a shallow depression. They dug. What they uncovered confirmed the fear everyone had tried to outrun. Human remains. The body had been buried hastily, wrapped in plastic, weighted down with chunks of concrete. Time, moisture, and soil had done their merciless work. Identification was difficult, but the scarf, the dental records, and later DNA testing removed all doubt. It was Emily Carter. The city reacted with a collective shudder. A missing woman had become a murdered one. An unanswered question had become a wound. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, defensive wounds on the forearms, bruising around the wrists, suggesting restraint. The cause of death was ruled homicide. The manner, violent. Personal. Close. But the lack of forensic evidence frustrated investigators. The killer had been careful. No usable fingerprints. No fibers. No identifiable DNA. Whatever weapon had been used was gone. And once again, the trail went cold. The community reeled. Candlelight vigils illuminated the streets. Strangers hugged strangers. Parents tightened their grip on their children's hands. Women changed their routines, avoided walking alone, clutched keys between their fingers like improvised weapons. Fear became a silent companion, trailing every step after sunset. Detectives assembled a profile. The killer was likely male. Physically strong, familiar with the area, comfortable navigating its shadows. Possibly someone Emily had seen before. Someone she might not immediately fear. The theory of a random attack struggled against the precision of the disposal. The burial site suggested planning, knowledge, intent. But profiles are only shadows of truth. They interviewed coworkers, friends, classmates, ex-boyfriends, casual acquaintances, anyone who had crossed Emily's path. Every relationship was dissected, every memory scrutinized, every argument unearthed. Nothing pointed decisively to a suspect. Her life, by all accounts, was unremarkable in the best possible way. No known enemies. No dark secrets. No hidden double existence. Yet someone had taken her life. Somewhere in Chicago, someone carried that knowledge in their chest. The case file thickened. Pages stacked. Photographs multiplied. Evidence bags filled shelves. Tips poured in, then slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. Months passed, then years. The lead detective retired. New faces took over, pouring through old notes, revisiting old scenes, knocking on doors that had already been opened once, twice, 3 times before. Still, the silence persisted. By 1995, Emily Carter's case was officially classified as a cold case. But cold did not mean forgotten. Her mother kept the porch light on every night, rituals stubbornly immune to logic. Her father visited the river every Sunday, standing in the same spot, staring at the dark water, as if waiting for an answer to rise from its depths. Her friends graduated, moved away, built lives, yet carried the weight of her absence like a stone in the chest. And somewhere unseen, the truth lay buried deeper than Emily herself had ever been. Years folded into decades. Chicago changed. Neighborhoods transformed. Old buildings were torn down. New ones rose in their place. Children who had once clutched missing person flyers grew into adults who barely remembered her name. Yet the file remained. A thick, dust-covered testament to failure, waiting in a forgotten cabinet for the day someone would open it again. Because cold cases do not die. They sleep. And when they wake, they do so violently. The file was reopened on a gray morning in early 2017, 25 years after Emily Carter disappeared into the night, when a young detective named Marcus Hale pulled a dust-caked folder from the bottom shelf of a forgotten cabinet and felt an inexplicable tightening in his chest. The paper smelled of age, ink fading into yellowed fibers, edges curled like brittle leaves, the weight of unresolved death pressed into every page, and as he flipped through the photographs, the witness statements, the forensic notes, he sensed the presence of something unfinished, something waiting, as if the case itself had been holding its breath all these years, suspended between memory and oblivion. Chicago had changed beyond recognition, but the echoes of 1992 still whispered through these pages, and Marcus, newly transferred into the cold case unit, felt an immediate pull toward the silence wrapped around Emily's name. The city in 2017 was louder, faster, more surveilled, a labyrinth of cameras, data, and digital footprints, yet the crime had been committed in a time when people could still vanish without leaving a trace behind. Marcus spent days reading, nights reimagining the final hours of Emily's life, tracing her walk from the diner, pausing at each intersection, visualizing the dim pools of streetlight, the shuttered windows, the hum of distant traffic, the soft crunch of footsteps on cold pavement, searching for the precise moment where ordinary routine ruptured into irreversible violence. He became obsessed with that invisible fracture, the second when something unexpected stepped out of the dark and seized control of the story. He rebuilt the timeline from scratch. Emily clocked out at 12:14 a.m. A coworker watched her step through the diner's glass door at 12:18. A customer recalled seeing her walking east at approximately 12:22. After that, nothing. 6 minutes of walking. 6 minutes in which an entire life collapsed. The narrowness of that window unsettled him. Abductions typically involved planning, stalking, waiting. But this felt opportunistic, impulsive, brutally efficient. Whoever took Emily had to be nearby. Watching. Waiting. Ready. Marcus began by re-interviewing witnesses, now decades older, their memories fragile, softened by time, yet sometimes sharpened by guilt. Doors opened hesitantly. Faces etched with lines and regret stared back at him. Some remembered nothing. Others remembered fragments. A flash of headlights. A car slowing. A figure standing too still. One woman, now in her 70s, broke down in tears when Marcus showed her Emily's photograph, whispering that she had once thought she saw a man and a woman arguing near the corner that night, but dismissed it as a lover's quarrel, something private, none of her business. The guilt had haunted her for years, an unspoken accusation she carried alone. Marcus noted every word, every hesitation, every contradiction. He mapped the street as it existed in 1992, overlaying it with present-day geography, reconstructing sightlines, blind spots, potential escape routes. He discovered that a now-demolished warehouse had once stood only a block away from where Emily vanished, its cavernous interior offering countless hiding places, its loading docks opening onto multiple alleyways. In the early 90s, the building had been a magnet for transients, drug users, and illegal activity. Yet in the original investigation, it had been searched only briefly, hampered by poor lighting, limited manpower, and the urgency of pursuing fresher leads. The idea that something might have been missed gnawed at him. He pulled the old evidence inventory and froze. A blood-stained fragment of concrete. A torn piece of plastic wrap. Fibers recovered from Emily's clothing. Fingernail scrapings. Soil samples. All preserved. All waiting for technologies that didn't exist in 1992. He requested DNA testing. The lab technicians treated the samples with cautious reverence, aware that decades-old evidence often yielded nothing but disappointment. Yet when the results came back, the room fell silent. A partial male DNA profile had been extracted from beneath Emily's fingernails. It was incomplete, degraded by time, but it was something. A ghostly genetic fingerprint reaching across 25 years, whispering that the past had not entirely erased itself. The profile did not match anyone in the national database. But it could be uploaded. And it could wait. As Marcus dove deeper, he uncovered inconsistencies in the original witness statements. Small discrepancies. Subtle contradictions. A man who claimed he was asleep yet reported hearing a car door slam. A woman who said she saw no one, but whose porch light had been replaced days later, suggesting it had been broken. A timeline that wavered by minutes, perhaps seconds. He sensed that truth lay hidden in these margins, in the things people almost said, the memories they half buried, the fears that silenced them. One name surfaced repeatedly, drifting through reports like a faint shadow: Daniel Reeves. In 1992, Reeves was 31, a local handyman known for odd jobs, small repairs, late-night errands. He lived 2 blocks from Emily's route home. He had been interviewed briefly during the initial investigation, offering a vague alibi. He claimed he was at home, asleep, watching television until he drifted off around midnight. No one corroborated it. No one challenged it. At the time, there was no reason to. Marcus pulled Reeves' file. The photograph showed a thin man with close-cropped hair, narrow eyes, a mouth set in a permanent line of irritation. His criminal record was minor: petty theft, trespassing, disorderly conduct. Nothing violent. Nothing that screamed murder. Yet something about the frequency of his name unsettled Marcus. He had been mentioned by multiple neighbors, not as a suspect, but as a familiar presence, a man always nearby, always lingering, always watching. In 2001, Reeves had moved out of state. In 2004, he had been arrested in Indiana for assault. Charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. In 2009, he was questioned in Kentucky in connection with a missing persons case. No charges were filed. A pattern emerged, faint yet undeniable, like footprints half filled with snow. Marcus contacted authorities in Indiana and Kentucky, requesting case files. What he found tightened the knot in his stomach. In each instance, a woman had vanished or been attacked late at night. In each instance, Reeves had been in the vicinity. In each instance, there was insufficient evidence to hold him. The cases remained unresolved, drifting into the same cold void as Emily's. Coincidence whispered softly. Instinct screamed otherwise. He tracked Reeves to a small town in southern Missouri, where he lived alone in a decaying house at the edge of a forest, surviving on disability checks and odd jobs. Marcus drove down with 2 colleagues, the winter landscape sliding past in a blur of gray and white, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. He rehearsed questions, imagined responses, prepared for resistance, denial, anger. But when Reeves opened the door, what he saw unsettled him more than hostility would have. Reeves looked afraid. His eyes darted, scanning the empty road behind them, the line of trees, the quiet horizon. His hands trembled as he clutched the doorframe. When Marcus introduced himself and mentioned Emily Carter's name, Reeves went pale, a flicker of something dark passing across his face, too fast to name, but too vivid to ignore. "I already told the police everything," he whispered. 25 years ago," Marcus replied calmly. "We're just asking you to tell us again." Inside, the house smelled of mildew and old smoke. The furniture was sparse. The curtains remained drawn despite the daylight. Shadows pooled in the corners. Reeves sat hunched at a small kitchen table, eyes fixed on a chipped mug, fingers twitching. His story unfolded in fragments. He said he barely remembered that night. He said he had been home. He said he had no reason to harm Emily. He said he barely knew her. Yet when Marcus asked him to describe her, Reeves hesitated, then offered details too specific for a casual acquaintance. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the cadence of her walk, the nights she worked late. The room seemed to shrink. Marcus pressed gently, then firmly. "Where were you exactly at 12:20 a.m.? What channel were you watching? Who could confirm your presence?" Reeves' answers wavered, shifting slightly with each repetition, a story rearranging itself to fit the shape of the moment. Still, there was no confession. No admission. Just fear and fragments and silence. They left with more questions than answers. Back in Chicago, Marcus fed the partial DNA profile into the national database and waited. Days passed. Then weeks. He checked obsessively, refreshing the system, scanning for updates, until one evening, long after the office had emptied, his screen flickered. A partial match. Not enough to identify a suspect, but enough to link the DNA to a family line. A genealogical thread extended backward, branching outward through public ancestry databases. Marcus followed it, tracing connections, building family trees, reconstructing bloodlines. Hours blurred into nights. Coffee went cold. The city outside slept and woke and slept again while he chased genetic ghosts through digital archives. The trail narrowed. And then it converged. Daniel Reeves. The probability was not absolute. The evidence was circumstantial. Yet the alignment was chilling. The DNA under Emily's fingernails pointed toward Reeves' familial line. His proximity, his inconsistencies, his history, his fear, all coalesced into a shape that could no longer be ignored. Marcus prepared a warrant for direct DNA collection. But before it could be served, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at the precinct, postmarked from rural Missouri, written in shaky handwriting, addressed simply to Homicide Division, Chicago Police Department. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper. 3 sentences. "I know what happened to Emily Carter. I have lived with it every day. If you want the truth, come alone." It was unsigned. But Marcus knew exactly who had sent it. And as he stared at the paper, he felt the past stirring, the long-buried secret pushing upward, clawing toward the surface, ready to tear open a wound the city had never truly healed. The road to southern Missouri unfurled beneath Marcus Hale's headlights like a narrow ribbon of shadow, cutting through endless stretches of winter-bare trees and empty farmland, the darkness pressing in from all sides, the silence inside the car broken only by the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic whisper of tires against cold asphalt. He had not told his superiors where he was going. He had not filed a travel request. He had not even left a note. The letter's final line, "Come alone," echoed in his mind with a force that bordered on compulsion, and despite every protocol, every warning instinct, he felt an irresistible pull toward that isolated house at the edge of the forest, as if something unseen were tugging at him, guiding him toward an encounter that had been waiting 25 years to unfold. Snow began to fall as he crossed the state line, thin flakes at first, then thicker, swirling in the beams of his headlights, erasing the road ahead in fleeting curtains of white. By the time he turned onto the narrow dirt lane that led to Reeves' property, the world had transformed into a silent, frozen void. The trees closed in. The sky vanished. Only the path ahead remained, illuminated in trembling fragments. When the house finally emerged, hunched and crooked against the darkness, a single light burned in one window, trembling like a nervous heartbeat. Marcus cut the engine. The silence rushed in, immediate and absolute. For a moment, he remained seated, hands resting on the steering wheel, breath fogging the windshield, every sense sharpened. The stillness felt unnatural, as if the land itself were holding its breath. He stepped out, boots crunching softly on frozen gravel, and approached the porch. The boards creaked beneath his weight, a brittle protest that echoed far too loudly in the quiet. He raised his hand to knock, hesitated, then rapped twice. The door opened almost instantly. Daniel Reeves stood in the doorway, gaunt and pale, his eyes rimmed red, his hair disheveled, his frame wrapped in a heavy coat despite the warmth of the interior. He looked older than his years, as if time had carved itself into his bones. Without a word, he stepped aside, allowing Marcus to enter. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and something metallic, something faintly reminiscent of rust. The single lamp cast long, distorted shadows across the walls, transforming ordinary objects into looming silhouettes. Reeves locked the door behind them, the click of the bolt loud and final, and for an instant, Marcus felt the weight of isolation settle around him, heavy and undeniable. "I can't keep this inside anymore," Reeves whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's eating me." They sat across from each other at the same small kitchen table where they had spoken weeks earlier. The mug, chipped and stained, still sat in the same place, as if untouched since their last meeting. Reeves' hands trembled as he clasped them together, knuckles whitening, fingers flexing as though trying to release something trapped beneath his skin. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he began. "None of it." Marcus remained silent, his gaze steady, his posture open, inviting, yet unyielding. "I saw her almost every night," Reeves continued, eyes fixed on the tabletop. "Walking home. Same route. Same pace. Same posture. I started noticing the little things. How she always checked the street before crossing. How she adjusted her bag on her shoulder. How she tucked her hair back when the wind picked up. I told myself it was nothing. Just observation. Just curiosity." He swallowed hard. But then it became waiting. The words fell into the room like stones. "I'd finish my work late and stand near the corner, pretending to smoke, pretending to check my watch, pretending to be just another shadow in the city. I never meant to touch her. I swear. I just wanted to be close. To feel seen. Invisible men crave that." Marcus felt a chill ripple through him. "That night," Reeves whispered, "she slipped on the sidewalk. Just a little. She laughed at herself. I stepped forward to help her up. She thanked me. Our hands touched. And something inside me broke." His breathing quickened, shallow, uneven. "She tried to walk away. I said her name. She froze. That's when fear filled her eyes. I reached for her just to stop her, just to explain, but she screamed. I panicked. I covered her mouth. She struggled. Hard. Stronger than I expected. I dragged her into the alley. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just reacted." The room seemed to constrict, walls inching closer, the ceiling lowering. "I hit her," he said. "Once. With a piece of concrete. I didn't know it would. I didn't mean to." His voice dissolved into sobs. Marcus' jaw tightened. He let the silence stretch, heavy and oppressive, until Reeves finally lifted his head, tears streaking his cheeks. "I buried her near the river. I wrapped her, so she wouldn't. I didn't want animals to." He shook his head violently, as if trying to dislodge the memory. "Every night since then, I see her face. I hear her scream. I smell the dirt. I can't sleep. I can't breathe. I've tried to outrun it, but it follows me. Always." For a moment, neither man spoke. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, a low, mournful chorus that seemed to echo the confession within. Marcus broke the silence softly. "Why now?" Reeves stared at the wall, eyes unfocused. "Because I'm dying," he said. "The doctors say my heart won't last another year. And I'm afraid. Afraid of what comes after. Afraid I'll face her again, and she'll look at me the way she did that night. I want to tell her family. I want them to know. I want some kind of forgiveness." Marcus felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief, rage, sorrow, grim satisfaction, colliding within him like opposing currents. He rose slowly from his chair. "You're coming with me," he said. Reeves nodded, a strange calm settling over his features, as though surrender had brought a perverse peace. He reached for his coat, then hesitated. "There's more," he murmured. Marcus paused. "She wasn't alone," Reeves said. "Not at first." The words hung in the air, thick and ominous. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "There was a car," Reeves whispered, "parked at the corner. Engine running. Headlights off. I noticed it when I was waiting. I thought it was nothing. But when she screamed, the door opened. Someone stepped out. A man. Tall. He didn't speak. He just watched." Marcus felt his pulse spike. "He didn't help her," Reeves continued. "He didn't stop me. He didn't intervene. He just stood there, like he was observing an experiment. When it was over, he got back in the car and drove away. Slow. Calm. Like he'd seen it all before." A new chill crept into the room. "Did you recognize him?" Marcus asked. Reeves shook his head. "No. But I've seen that car since. Over the years. In different cities. Different states. Same model. Same dent on the rear fender. Same broken taillight. I thought I was losing my mind. But it kept appearing. Always watching. Always disappearing." Marcus' thoughts raced. A witness. An accomplice. A predator even more dangerous than the man sitting before him. "Why didn't you tell the police?" he demanded. "Because I was guilty," Reeves replied. "Because I was afraid. Because I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe the darkness would stay quiet too." Snow lashed against the windows, the storm intensifying, as if the world outside were reacting to the revelation within. Marcus activated his recorder. "Describe the car," he said. Reeves closed his eyes. Dark blue sedan. Late 80s model. Illinois plates. The first 3 letters were JMC. I never forgot that. I couldn't. The pieces began to rearrange themselves, forming a new, far more disturbing picture. Emily Carter's murder was not the act of a lone, desperate man. Someone else had been there. Someone who watched. Someone who vanished. Someone who, even now, might still be moving through the shadows. As Marcus led Reeves out into the storm, handcuffs clicking around his wrists, he felt the cold case shifting beneath his feet, the ground of certainty giving way to something far more treacherous, far more terrifying. The truth they had unearthed was only the beginning. Because in the darkness of 1992, 2 sets of eyes had watched Emily Carter die. And only one had finally stepped forward. The confession detonated inside the precinct like a delayed explosion, sending shockwaves through every corridor, every office, every mind that absorbed its implications, because Reeves' admission, chilling as it was, did not close the case. It tore it open wider than ever before, revealing a second presence in the shadows, a silent observer whose existence transformed a solitary murder into something far more sinister, far more calculated, and far more dangerous. For Marcus Hale, sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a relentless replay of Reeves' words, the image of a dark sedan idling without headlights, the figure stepping out only to watch, the unnerving stillness of a witness who chose silence, and the horrifying possibility that Emily Carter's killer might not have been alone, might not have been the most dangerous man at that corner that night. The first task was verification. Reeves' confession had to withstand scrutiny. Detectives retraced his account step by step, reconstructing the timeline, the route, the alley, the burial site, the disposal methods. Details matched evidence that had never been publicly released. The type of plastic wrap, the weight and size of the concrete chunks, the shallow depth of the grave, the precise angle of the skull fracture. He knew things only the killer could know. His guilt was beyond doubt. Yet the presence of the unknown watcher remained a volatile question mark, one that refused to fade, one that gnawed at the edges of every theory. Marcus pulled archived traffic reports, parking violations, patrol logs, anything that might place a dark blue sedan near the intersection of 63rd Street on that October night. Records from 1992 were incomplete, fragmented, riddled with gaps, but buried within them, he found a single, cryptic entry, a call about an unattended vehicle with engine running, logged at 12:31 a.m., less than 2 blocks from Emily's route home. The responding officer had arrived to find nothing. No car. No witnesses. No explanation. The incident had been closed within minutes. But the timestamp burned into Marcus' mind. 12:31 a.m. Less than 15 minutes after Emily had last been seen alive. He requested the patrol car's dashcam footage, knowing the odds were slim. Miraculously, a degraded VHS tape still existed, mislabeled, forgotten, yet preserved. The footage flickered to life in a dim screening room, the image grainy, washed in monochrome blues and grays. For long seconds, there was nothing but empty streets, drifting snow, the soft crackle of analog static. Then, for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, headlights glided across the far edge of the frame, illuminating the curved silhouette of a sedan pulling away from the curb. The camera did not capture the license plate, but it captured the dent, a small, unmistakable deformation on the rear fender, exactly as Reeves had described. The room went silent. Someone else had been there. Someone whose presence had been erased with clinical precision. Marcus expanded the search, digging into reports from Indiana and Kentucky, the cases where Reeves' name had surfaced but never stuck. He found echoes of the same pattern, sightings of a dark sedan. Witnesses recalling an unidentified man loitering nearby. Anonymous tips about a quiet observer who vanished before police arrived. Each fragment alone meant little. Together, they formed a chilling mosaic of intent. This was not coincidence. This was choreography. The deeper Marcus dug, the clearer it became that Emily Carter's murder might have been only one chapter in a much larger, far more horrifying story. A shadowy accomplice. A watcher. A facilitator. Perhaps even a predator who operated through proxies, remaining invisible while others took the risks, the blame, the fall. The question was no longer who killed Emily Carter. It was who was watching. Weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and frantic research. Marcus combed through decades of unsolved disappearances across the Midwest, searching for common threads. Female victims. Late-night abductions. Proximity to major roads. Witness accounts describing a dark sedan. Gradually, the map filled with red pins, spreading outward from Chicago like a malignant constellation. Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, Ohio. Each pin marked a life interrupted, a family shattered, a community left with nothing but questions. The pattern was unmistakable. A traveler, a hunter, a ghost. Marcus enlisted the help of federal analysts, bringing the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit into the fold. They built a profile of the unknown observer, highly organized, methodical, emotionally detached, likely older than Reeves, experienced, patient. Someone who derived satisfaction not only from the act of violence, but from watching it unfold, from controlling it at a distance, from orchestrating chaos without exposing himself. The analysts believed he might have groomed unstable men like Reeves, subtly encouraging their obsessions, steering them toward victims, positioning himself as a silent overseer who could intervene if necessary, or simply observe. A puppeteer. The implications were staggering. Reeves, now in custody, was confronted with the emerging evidence. He listened in silence, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. When Marcus showed him the dashcam still, his face drained of color. "He followed me," Reeves whispered. "All these years. I thought I was imagining it. I thought it was guilt, paranoia. But he was real. He was always there." "Why didn't you run?" Marcus asked. "I did," Reeves said bitterly. I crossed state lines, changed jobs, changed routines. It didn't matter. Sometimes I'd see the car parked across the street. Sometimes I'd glimpse it in my rearview mirror.
Sometimes it would just pass by.
Slow, deliberate, like a reminder. A reminder of what? Reeves swallowed. That he owned me. The task force traced vehicle registration databases, insurance claims, traffic citations, anything that could point to a dark blue late 80s sedan with a damaged rear fender. Thousands of matches surfaced. Most were dead ends. Scrapped vehicles. Salvage titles. Junkyards. But one record stood out, a 1989 Ford Crown Victoria, registered in Illinois in 1992, plates beginning with JMC, sold at auction in 1994 to a private buyer in Indiana, then re-registered under a different name, and then again in Kentucky, and again in Missouri, always following the same geographic arc as the disappearances. The owner's name, Harold Mercer. Age in 1992, 48. Occupation, long-haul truck dispatcher. Criminal record, none. Psychological evaluations, none. A man so unremarkable, he might as well have been invisible. Marcus felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. They pulled Mercer's history apart piece by piece. His employment placed him on overnight shifts, granting him intimate knowledge of freight routes, highway traffic patterns, rest stops, isolated stretches of road. His work allowed him to move freely across state lines, blending seamlessly into the constant flow of commerce. He owned multiple properties, most inherited, scattered across rural areas, providing him with safe havens, storage spaces, places to hide. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, forgettable, a man who kept to himself. No close relationships, no long-term partners, no children, no attachments. The kind of man no one ever really noticed. Surveillance teams were deployed to Mercer's current residence in southern Missouri, a modest farmhouse perched at the edge of a sprawling field. For days, they watched. Mercer adhered to a rigid routine: early morning coffee, a short drive into town, hours spent alone, occasional trips to hardware stores, late-night walks along the perimeter of his property. He spoke to no one. He received no visitors. Yet something about his movements felt deliberate, controlled, as if every step had been rehearsed. On the fifth night, a camera captured Mercer standing at the end of his driveway, staring into the darkness, motionless for nearly 40 minutes, his posture unnervingly still, his gaze fixed on nothing and everything at once. The decision was made. They would bring him in. The arrest took place just before dawn. Tactical units approached in silence, boots sinking into frost-coated grass, weapons trained on the farmhouse. The door opened slowly, as if Mercer had been expecting them. He offered no resistance. His eyes, pale and penetrating, drifted from one officer to the next, lingering briefly on Marcus, as if recognizing him, as if acknowledging an adversary long anticipated. At the station, Mercer remained calm, composed, almost amused. I wondered how long it would take, he said softly. The room stiffened. Marcus leaned forward. You've been following Daniel Reeves for 25 years. Mercer's lips curved into a faint smile. Following is such a crude word. Observing is more accurate. You were there the night Emily Carter died. Yes. You watched her get murdered. Yes. Why? Mercer's gaze sharpened. Because watching tells you who a person truly is. Under pressure, under fear, under desperation. That's when the mask slips. A chill crept through the room. You orchestrated it, Marcus said. You found men like Reeves. You encouraged them. You put them in position. I offered opportunity, Mercer replied. They chose what to do with it. And the others? Marcus demanded. How many more? Mercer tilted his head, considering. More than you'll ever know. Silence swallowed the room. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was not a single revelation, but a cascade of horrors, each more disturbing than the last, each peeling back another layer of a darkness that had flourished undetected for decades. And as Marcus stared into Mercer's unblinking eyes, he understood with devastating clarity that the cold case of Emily Carter had not merely been solved. It had opened a door, and behind it waited a nightmare vast enough to consume an entire lifetime. The interrogation room felt too small to contain Harold Mercer. Not because of his size, not because of his posture, but because of the gravity he carried with him, an oppressive weight that seemed to bend the air, compressing it into something thick and difficult to breathe. He sat perfectly still, hands folded, back straight, eyes calm. A man who had waited decades for this moment and now appeared almost relieved that the waiting was over. Marcus Hale studied him from across the metal table, searching for some visible crack, some tremor, some trace of fear, but found only a chilling serenity, as if Mercer had already detached himself from consequence. They began slowly. Names, addresses, timelines. Mercer answered with polite precision, never raising his voice, never hesitating, never offering more than was asked, yet never less. Each word felt calculated, measured, placed deliberately like a chess piece. He admitted to being present at multiple crime scenes. He admitted to observing assaults, abductions, even murders. He denied direct physical involvement, insisting he never laid a hand on a victim. He described himself as a student of human behavior, an archivist of breaking points, a collector of fear. "I don't need to kill," he said quietly. "Killing is crude, messy, unrefined. I'm interested in the moment before. The moment when someone realizes they are no longer in control." Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. "You manipulated vulnerable men," he snapped. "You stalked women. You engineered terror." Mercer tilted his head slightly. "I observed patterns. I facilitated circumstance. If a man was already capable of violence, I simply removed obstacles. And if he wasn't, then he never acted," Mercer replied. "I have no interest in creating monsters, only in revealing them." The implication hung heavy between them. Hours blurred. Interrogators rotated. Psychologists observed behind one-way glass. Every answer Mercer gave opened 10 new questions. His movements across the Midwest mirrored unsolved cases with eerie precision. His employment records aligned with disappearances. His vehicle registrations tracked the geographic drift of violence like a silent metronome marking time and blood. But the most unsettling revelation came near midnight, when Marcus pressed him about Emily Carter. "She was never meant to die," Mercer said softly. "She was a test." "A test for what?" "For Reeves," Mercer replied, "to see if he would cross the threshold. And if he hadn't," Mercer shrugged, "then I would have waited. There are always others." Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment, steadying himself. When he opened them, the world felt darker, heavier, as if something fundamental had shifted. Reeves' confession was revisited under this new light. His account of seeing the sedan, the silent man, the sense of being watched, it all fit. But something else now emerged. His obsession had not formed in isolation. Mercer had noticed him weeks earlier, lingering near the diner, watching Emily. He had initiated casual conversations, subtle nudges, harmless comments that slowly evolved into encouragement, validation, permission. A whisper in the dark that grew louder with each passing night. The manipulation was surgical. Reeves had been a spark. Mercer had been oxygen. With the scope of the investigation expanding rapidly, federal agencies descended on Chicago. Task forces formed. Data analysts built sprawling digital maps linking victims, vehicles, travel routes, employment records, and witness statements. Every cold case within a 5-state radius was re-examined. Families who had waited decades for answers received calls they never believed would come. Some collapsed in grief, others in rage, a few in devastating relief. Bodies were found, shallow graves unearthed, evidence long overlooked reanalyzed. And everywhere, the same ghostly fingerprints of Mercer's presence emerged, not physical traces, but behavioral echoes, a recurring silhouette at the edges of tragedy. Yet for all the progress, the question that haunted Marcus most remained unanswered. Why watch? Why not intervene? Why not stop it? Late one night, alone with Mercer in the interrogation room, Marcus finally asked. Mercer leaned back, exhaling slowly. Because stopping it destroys the purity of the moment, he said. Fear, when it blooms naturally, is honest. Uncontaminated. Intervention corrupts it. Marcus stared at him, struggling to comprehend a mind so utterly detached from human empathy. You're describing art, Marcus said bitterly. Mercer's eyes flickered. In a way. The trial preparations began almost immediately. Prosecutors built an unprecedented case, arguing that Mercer's consistent presence, manipulation, and facilitation constituted conspiracy, accessory to murder, and psychological coercion. Defense attorneys countered that observation alone was not a crime, that moral repugnance could not substitute for legal culpability. The courtroom became a battleground of philosophy and law, ethics and statutes, while the families watched, desperate for justice that might never fully materialize. Reeves, racked by guilt and deteriorating health, agreed to testify. The day he took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. His voice trembled as he described the slow erosion of his restraint, the subtle encouragement, the sense of permission that had grown in him like a parasite. He spoke of Mercer's presence, the silent approval, the terrible comfort of knowing someone was watching. Tears streamed down his face as he recounted Emily's final moments, his words breaking under the weight of memory. Across the room, Mercer watched impassively. When it was his turn, he rose smoothly, straightening his jacket, and faced the jury. I am not a killer, he said. I am a mirror. I show people who they truly are. Gasps rippled through the gallery. He described his life as a series of quiet observations, his childhood marked by neglect, isolation, and an early fascination with fear. He spoke of discovering, almost by accident, that people revealed their deepest selves when they believed no one was watching, and how intoxicating it felt to become the unseen witness, the invisible judge. He denied responsibility for the violence, claiming the choices belonged solely to the men who acted. Yet as his testimony unfolded, a chilling portrait emerged, a man who had woven himself into the margins of countless lives, subtly shaping outcomes, steering events toward catastrophe, then retreating into invisibility, untouched, unscathed, unaccountable. The jury listened in silence. Outside, the media storm exploded. Chicago cold case unmasks Midwest shadow predator. 25 years of silence. The Watcher revealed. Long-buried secret surface as trial rocks nation. Emily Carter's name surged back into public consciousness, her photograph once again plastered across screens and headlines, her smile now a symbol of stolen innocence and belated truth. Candlelight vigils returned to 63rd Street. Strangers gathered, standing shoulder to shoulder in the cold, holding flickering flames against the darkness, as if daring it to advance again. For Marcus, the case consumed everything. He dreamed of dim alleyways and idling engines. He woke to the imagined echo of footsteps behind him. He began to notice dark sedans in traffic, their silhouettes triggering involuntary spikes of fear. The boundary between vigilance and paranoia blurred. He understood, with unsettling clarity, how easily the human mind could fracture under prolonged exposure to darkness. And still, a deeper unease lingered. Because Mercer had admitted to watching, but he had never admitted to stopping. And in a world as vast and restless as this one, Marcus could not escape the possibility that Mercer had not been the only watcher, that others like him might still exist, drifting unnoticed through the currents of everyday life, observing, waiting, learning. The verdict, when it finally arrived, felt both inevitable and insufficient. Guilty on multiple counts of conspiracy, accessory to murder, obstruction of justice, and psychological coercion. Sentenced to life without parole. The courtroom erupted in sobs, shouts, and stunned silence. Yet as Mercer was led away in shackles, he turned his head slightly, his gaze brushing past Marcus, and for an instant, something unreadable passed between them. Not defiance, not regret, but something disturbingly close to satisfaction. As if the story, at last revealed, had fulfilled its purpose, as if the truth itself had been the final act. And as the doors closed behind him, sealing away one of the darkest figures Chicago had ever unearthed, Marcus was left with a haunting certainty. Some crimes do not end when the perpetrator is caught. They end only when the echoes finally fade. And some echoes, once unleashed, never truly do. The verdict did not bring silence. It brought noise, a constant, grinding hum of questions, doubts, and unresolved dread that seeped into the cracks of daily life, refusing to be contained by prison walls or legal conclusions. Chicago exhaled, but the breath caught halfway, suspended between relief and unease, because while Harold Mercer had been sentenced, the scale of his shadow continued to expand, stretching backward through decades and outward across state lines, entangling lives that had never known his name yet had felt his influence in ways they could not articulate. For Marcus Hale, the days after the trial unfolded in a strange blur, as if time itself had fractured, its rhythm permanently altered. The relentless pace that had driven him for months suddenly vanished, leaving behind an unsettling stillness. There were no more interrogations to prepare for, no more timelines to reconstruct, no more hidden connections to unearth. And yet his mind refused to rest. Every quiet moment was invaded by echoes: Reeves' trembling confession, Mercer's serene detachment, the imagined sound of Emily Carter's final breath dissolving into the dark. Sleep became elusive. When it came, it brought dreams saturated with shadows and motion. In them, Marcus walked endlessly through dim streets, footsteps always trailing behind him, never close enough to confront, never distant enough to escape. He would turn, heart pounding, only to find empty sidewalks and flickering streetlights, the city itself watching in silent complicity. He woke drenched in sweat, pulse racing, his apartment suddenly unfamiliar, as if the walls had shifted while he slept. The psychological toll of the case began to surface across the task force. Officers who had spent months immersed in Mercer's web exhibited classic signs of vicarious trauma: irritability, insomnia, emotional detachment. Some requested transfers. Others took extended leave. A few simply disappeared into their work, burying themselves in new investigations, desperate to outrun the memories that clung like smoke. But the case refused to remain contained within its original boundaries. As federal agencies widened their scope, new reports surfaced, unsettling accounts of near misses, moments when women recalled being followed, watched, or approached, only to escape through chance or intervention. In several instances, witnesses described a dark sedan idling nearby, its headlights off, its engine humming softly in the night. Most of these encounters had occurred years ago, dismissed at the time as paranoia or coincidence. Now, in the cold glare of hindsight, they glowed with ominous significance. One report in particular seized Marcus' attention. In 1996, a college student named Rachel Monroe had vanished briefly in central Indiana, only to reappear 2 days later, disoriented, bruised, and terrified. She had claimed she was abducted by a stranger, but managed to escape from a roadside motel. Her account included mention of a man in a dark sedan who followed her for several blocks before the abduction. The case had been shelved after her alleged captor was never identified. At the time, inconsistencies in her story had led investigators to question her credibility. Marcus requested the files. What he found disturbed him deeply. Rachel's description of the sedan matched Reeves and Mercer's accounts in striking detail. The same model, the same damaged rear fender, the same silent presence. And in her initial statement, recorded before trauma and exhaustion could erode precision, she mentioned a second man watching from a distance, making no attempt to assist or intervene. Rachel Monroe was still alive. Marcus arranged to meet her. She lived in a small town outside Indianapolis, where she worked as a school librarian, her life carefully structured, her routines rigid, as if order itself were a shield against chaos. When Marcus introduced himself and explained the purpose of his visit, her face drained of color. For a long moment, she said nothing, eyes fixed on a point beyond his shoulder, as though staring into memory itself. "I always knew he was real," she whispered finally. "They told me I was mistaken. That stress had distorted my perception. But I knew what I saw." Her voice trembled as she described the night she vanished. The slow-moving car, the unnerving sense of being observed, the man who emerged from the shadows to grab her, and the second figure who remained behind, watching. She recalled how that figure had lifted a hand slightly, a subtle gesture that seemed to signal approval. It was that moment, she said, that broke her, that convinced her she was facing something far beyond random violence. "I felt like prey in a laboratory," she murmured. "Like they were testing how far they could push me before I shattered." Marcus felt a familiar chill crawl along his spine. Rachel's testimony reinforced a grim hypothesis. Mercer's network extended beyond Reeves, possibly involving multiple perpetrators, each manipulated, observed, and discarded. The scale of his psychological experiment, if that was indeed what it was, defied comprehension. And while Mercer now sat behind bars, the possibility that others he had influenced might still be at large gnawed relentlessly at Marcus' thoughts. Reeves, deteriorating rapidly in custody, confirmed these fears during a final interview. There were others, he admitted, his breath shallow, his skin ashen. Men like me. Lonely. Angry. Invisible. He found us. He listened. He understood how to make us feel powerful. "How many?" Marcus asked quietly. Reeves closed his eyes. "I don't know. Dozens, maybe. Over the years." The words landed like a hammer. The investigation ballooned into one of the largest cold case reviews in Midwestern history. Task forces re-examined unsolved crimes dating back to the late 70s, searching for Mercer's subtle signature: proximity, observation, psychological facilitation. The workload was staggering. Resources strained. Leads multiplied faster than they could be pursued. For every case that aligned convincingly, 5 others hovered in maddening ambiguity, their connections tantalizing yet unprovable. And always, there remained the haunting possibility that Mercer had not been alone in his role as observer, that others like him, unseen, unregistered, unremarkable, might be conducting their own experiments in silence. The public, meanwhile, struggled to process the enormity of the revelations. Talk shows debated morality and culpability. Editorials questioned the limits of the law. Social media erupted with speculation, fear, and conspiracy. Some hailed Mercer as a monster finally unmasked. Others, disturbingly, framed him as a dark philosopher, a provocateur exposing humanity's capacity for evil. Marcus avoided the commentary, repulsed by the spectacle, yet acutely aware that such narratives risked inspiring imitation. At night, he walked the city, retracing Emily's final steps, listening to the pulse of traffic, the distant echo of laughter, the soft cadence of strangers' footsteps. He watched the interplay of light and shadow along the sidewalks, imagining how easily a figure could emerge, how effortlessly someone could blend back into anonymity. The vulnerability of ordinary moments struck him with renewed force. One evening, as he stood at the corner where Emily had last been seen, a sudden gust of wind scattered leaves across the pavement, their dry rustle mimicking the sound of hurried steps. Marcus' heart lurched. For an instant, the past and present collided, overlaying each other with devastating clarity. He saw Emily walking alone. He saw Reeves waiting. He saw Mercer watching. And beneath it all, he felt the fragile thinness of safety, the precarious balance that separated routine from catastrophe. In the months that followed, fragments of Mercer's hidden life continued to surface. Hidden journals recovered from his farmhouse revealed cryptic entries detailing observations, emotional assessments, behavioral predictions. He cataloged fear the way others cataloged birds, noting patterns, deviations, anomalies. Victims were reduced to data points, their suffering abstracted into variables and outcomes. It was a meticulous, methodical record of dehumanization. Yet one entry stood apart. A single page, dated weeks after Emily's murder, bore only a short sentence, scrawled with unusual force. The experiment has exceeded parameters. Marcus stared at the words, unsettled by their ambiguity. Exceeded in what way? Too violent? Too public? Too close to exposure? The answer remained elusive. Then, unexpectedly, a new letter arrived. This one bore no return address. No signature. No explanation. Inside, only a fragment of text, clipped from an old newspaper, yellowed with age. Unidentified woman found near I-65. Case unsolved. Below it, in careful handwriting, some stories never end. Marcus felt a cold dread seep through him. Mercer was incarcerated. Reeves was dying. Yet the shadow persisted. And as Marcus stood alone in his office, the city humming faintly beyond the windows, he understood with chilling clarity that the cold case of Emily Carter had not merely revealed a buried truth, it had awakened something far more dangerous. A legacy of observation. A lineage of watchers. A darkness that did not require presence to endure. Only memory. Only suggestion. Only fear. And in that realization, the boundaries of the case dissolved, expanding outward into an endless horizon of uncertainty, where every quiet street, every idling car, every unseen gaze became a potential echo of a nightmare that might never truly end. The letter changed everything. Not because of what it said, but because of what it implied, that despite the arrests, despite the trials, despite the life sentences and confessions, the story was still unfolding, still breathing, still reaching outward with unseen hands. The words "some stories never end" lingered in Marcus Hale's mind like a low-frequency hum, vibrating beneath every thought, every movement, every attempt at normalcy, until the world itself began to feel subtly misaligned, as if reality had slipped a fraction of an inch off its axis. For days, the task force dissected the letter. The newspaper fragment was traced to a small-town publication in rural Indiana, dated August 1984. The article described the discovery of a young woman's body near Interstate 65, her identity unknown, her death ruled a homicide, the case eventually swallowed by time and bureaucracy. It predated Emily Carter's murder by 8 years. It predated Reeves' known activity. And it fit the expanding pattern with eerie precision. A body near a highway. A late-night disappearance. No witnesses. No suspects. No closure. Marcus drove to Indiana before dawn, the road stretching endlessly before him, cornfields and skeletal trees blurring into monochrome streaks. The town, when he arrived, seemed suspended in another era. Its main street lined with shuttered storefronts and faded signage, the air thick with quiet resignation. At the local police station, he was handed a thin, brittle case file that felt alarmingly light in his hands. The victim had been estimated to be between 18 and 22. Cause of death: blunt force trauma. Evidence of restraint. No identification. No fingerprints on record. She had been buried hastily, partially concealed by brush, discovered by a passing motorist who noticed disturbed soil. The parallels to Emily Carter's case were unmistakable. What struck Marcus most was a brief notation scribbled in the margin of the original report. Possible secondary presence. Unconfirmed. The responding officer had apparently believed someone else had been nearby during the murder, but lacking evidence, the theory had been abandoned. Marcus stared at the words, a chill creeping along his spine. The past was speaking. He expanded the search, pulling every unsolved homicide and disappearance along Interstate 65 between 1975 and 2000. The pattern solidified with terrifying clarity. Clusters of cases, spaced irregularly yet connected by geography, method, and circumstance. The victims differed in age, background, and lifestyle, but their final moments shared a common architecture of violence. And in nearly every file, buried beneath layers of dust and neglect, lay hints of an observer. A passing car, a figure standing at a distance, a witness who felt watched, a sense of presence that defied logic. The investigation shifted again, evolving into something broader, darker, and far more disturbing than a single cold case. What had begun as the search for one killer now resembled the excavation of an entire subculture of predation, a hidden ecosystem of watchers, facilitators, and silent witnesses whose existence challenged every assumption about crime, responsibility, and accountability. Marcus convened a closed-door briefing with federal analysts, behavioral psychologists, and veteran investigators. "We may be dealing with a phenomenon, not just an individual," he said. "A behavioral contagion, a methodology, a mindset that spreads." The room absorbed his words in heavy silence. The psychologist proposed a chilling hypothesis. Mercer's actions, his philosophy, his manipulation might have inspired imitation, either directly through contact or indirectly through subtle exposure. Men like Reeves were not merely isolated cases. They were nodes in a network of influence, a constellation of damaged psyches drawn toward validation, control, and power. Mercer had been a catalyst, but not necessarily the origin. "There may be others who discovered this way of operating independently," one analyst said. "Observers who never touch, never act, yet derive satisfaction from orchestrating violence. They remain invisible because our justice system is built to pursue direct action, not indirect manipulation." The implications were staggering. How do you catch someone who never leaves fingerprints? How do you prosecute someone whose weapon is suggestion? How do you expose a crime that exists primarily in the psychological realm? The investigation began to feel less like law enforcement and more like a descent into the architecture of human darkness. New leads surfaced daily. Anonymous tips. Forgotten memories. Half-remembered encounters. The public, now hyper-aware, flooded hotlines with reports of suspicious vehicles, lingering figures, unsettling interactions. Most proved benign, manifestations of collective anxiety. But buried within the noise were genuine signals, fragments of truth struggling to be heard. One such signal emerged from a truck stop outside Louisville, Kentucky. A waitress reported a regular customer who fit Mercer's physical description, though younger, who spent hours sitting alone, watching travelers, asking probing questions about routes, schedules, vulnerabilities. She recalled how he once commented, almost casually, on how easily a woman could vanish along certain stretches of highway. His tone had been detached, analytical, as though discussing weather patterns rather than human lives. Marcus and his team followed the trail. The man's name was Peter Langford. Age, 39. Occupation, freelance logistics consultant. Criminal record, none. Online presence, minimal. His travel patterns mirrored a subset of the cases, overlapping routes, intersecting timelines. Surveillance was initiated. For weeks, Langford was observed moving through truck stops, rest areas, and roadside motels, always alone, always watching, rarely engaging. He appeared to collect information the way others collected souvenirs, storing details about people, places, and routines with meticulous care. Yet, without direct evidence of wrongdoing, there was little they could do. The frustration was suffocating. Then, late one night, a call came in. A young woman had been found wandering along a rural highway in southern Illinois, barefoot, disoriented, her wrists bruised, her clothes torn. She claimed she had escaped from a motel room after being abducted by a man she described as quiet, polite, and terrifyingly calm. But what seized Marcus' attention was her mention of another man, one who stood outside the room, watching through the window, his face partially obscured by reflection. She described his car. Dark. Sedan. Damaged rear fender. Marcus felt the world tilt. The survivor, a 19-year-old named Olivia Barnes, recounted her ordeal in halting fragments. She remembered being followed. She remembered the sudden hand at her arm. She remembered the motel room. And she remembered the other man, the observer, whose presence chilled her more than her attacker's violence. "He didn't help me," she whispered. "He didn't stop it. He just watched. And I think he enjoyed it." Her description of the observer matched Peter Langford with unsettling accuracy. A warrant was secured. Langford was arrested at a rest stop outside Springfield, Illinois, sitting alone in his sedan, engine idling, headlights off. Inside the trunk, investigators found notebooks.
Dozens of them,
each filled with meticulous entries, dates, locations, descriptions of individuals' emotional assessments, risk evaluations. It was a catalog of human vulnerability, a chilling mirror of Mercer's journals. And scattered among the pages were references to Mercer himself, cryptic notations, philosophical reflections, ideological alignments. Mercer had not merely acted alone. He had inspired. Interrogated, Langford initially denied everything. But confronted with the notebooks, his composure fractured. He spoke of discovering Mercer's ideas through obscure academic forums, of becoming fascinated by the notion of detached observation, of believing that by watching, he could transcend ordinary morality. "I wanted to understand fear," Langford said softly. "To map it. To predict it. To master it." Marcus listened, a familiar dread settling in his chest. The watchers were multiplying, and each revelation peeled back another layer of a darkness that felt disturbingly adaptive, capable of evolving, of reproducing, of surviving even the most aggressive pursuit. As Langford was led away, Marcus stood alone in the interrogation room, staring at the empty chair where another silent observer had sat, and felt a profound, sinking realization take hold. Emily Carter's cold case had not merely exposed a buried crime. It had illuminated a hidden world. A world where violence could be engineered without touch. Where guilt could be outsourced. Where evil could thrive in silence. And somewhere beyond the reach of cameras and databases, others like Mercer and Langford might still be watching, learning, waiting. The city outside pulsed with life, oblivious. But for Marcus, every shadow now held the potential for meaning. Every still figure. Every idling engine. Every unblinking gaze. The night had grown crowded. And the watchers were no longer alone. Night fell over the city like a velvet black curtain, draping every street in a heavy, suffocating stillness. On the 7th floor of the investigation unit, the cold white glow of fluorescent lights spilled over exhausted, tense faces. The air was thick with anticipation, a mixture of hope and dread. Inspector Lamb stood silently before the evidence board. More than 30 photographs of victims, witnesses, locations, and timelines were connected by a tangled web of red strings. At the center, a single name was circled 3 times. Hong Min Kang, a successful businessman, a model philanthropist, a perfect husband and father in the eyes of society, and possibly a monster in human form. Lamb slowly raised his hand, tracing the red string linking Kang to the first disappearance. Years of fragmented clues, once scattered and meaningless, were now aligning with chilling clarity. Every victim had some indirect connection to Kang, a canceled business contract, a shadowy debt, a land dispute, or simply a dangerous secret they had accidentally discovered. No one vanished because of sudden rage. Each disappearance was carefully selected. Elsewhere in the city, Hong Min Kang sat in his luxurious living room, slowly sipping a glass of dark red wine. On the wall, the television broadcast the evening news, reporting once again on the unsolved string of disappearances. Kang's face remained calm, even faintly sorrowful. But deep within his eyes, a cold glint flashed, like the brief reflection of a blade. He understood clearly. The net was tightening. It was only a matter of time. He set the glass down and walked into his private study. Behind a large landscape painting, a hidden wall safe clicked open after a long, complex code was entered. Inside was not money, but thick folders, photographs, USB drives, and meticulously handwritten notes. Each folder bore a human name. Each name represented a life that had vanished from the world. Kang ran his fingers slowly across them, like a conductor touching the keys of a grand piano. All of it was his creation. A perfect collection. Back at headquarters, a sudden breakthrough shifted everything. From archived digital data, the cyber unit managed to restore a faint GPS signal emitted by the 4th victim's phone, a signal long dismissed as interference. The final location pointed to the northern outskirts, near a cluster of warehouses abandoned for more than a decade. Lamb clenched his fist. Mobilize all units. Move now. Police vehicles tore through the night, shattering the silence of the deserted fields. Cold wind lashed against the windows, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting grass. The warehouse loomed ahead, a massive block of darkness rising from the wasteland. The rusted metal door screeched as it was forced open. Inside, the stench of mold mixed with something metallic and sickening, making several officers hold their breath. Flashlights swept across stained walls, dangling ropes and long, jagged scratch marks carved into the concrete floor. So many of them. Signs of desperate struggle. In the farthest corner, they discovered a small wooden door, tightly locked. When it was broken down, the sight beyond froze everyone in place. A sealed room with no windows. Its walls were covered in carved markings, crude records of dates, names, pleas for mercy, and final messages. This was not a holding cell. This was a waiting room for death. Yet amid the horrifying evidence, Lamb noticed something strange. There were no traces of actual killings here. The victims had only been imprisoned, then taken elsewhere. A final destination, a place still unknown, which meant one terrifying possibility. Some of them might still be alive. That fragile hope reignited a fire within Lamb, but also burdened him with crushing pressure.
Time was not on their side.
And if Hong Min Kang truly stood behind it all, he was far more dangerous than any criminal they had ever faced. Because Kang did not act in madness. He acted with clarity, precision, and flawless calculation. That night, while the city sank into deep sleep, Lamb stood alone by the window of his office. Streetlights reflected against the glass, splitting his face into two opposing halves, light and shadow. He knew they had crossed a line from which there was no return. From this moment on, this was no longer just an investigation. It was a deadly race between justice and a man who had prepared for darkness for years. And somewhere, in a lightless room, there might still be human beings breathing faintly, waiting for a miracle. A miracle called the truth. Dawn crept slowly across Chicago, washing the skyline in pale gray light, but inside the investigation unit, no one felt the relief of morning. The discovery at the abandoned warehouse had detonated like a silent bomb, shattering every remaining illusion of safety. The city was waking up unaware that somewhere in its vast sprawl, a predator still moved freely, calculating, adapting, preparing. Inspector Lamb had not slept. His eyes burned, his jaw clenched tight as he stared at the newly updated evidence board. The warehouse photographs had replaced the old uncertainties. The red strings now formed a brutal symmetry, converging ever more tightly around a single name: Hong Min Kang. Every new lead, every recovered file, every restored digital fragment pulled the circle smaller. And Kang felt it. In the quiet of his mansion, he stood motionless before a tall window, watching the pale glow of dawn dissolve the darkness. His reflections stared back at him, immaculate, composed, untouchable. The mask of respectability remained flawless, but beneath it, his mind raced, assembling possibilities, predicting consequences, calculating exits. He had always believed himself untouchable. Now, for the first time in decades, doubt flickered. Not fear.
Doubt.
By mid-morning, Lamb received confirmation that sent a shockwave through the unit. A financial analyst had uncovered a hidden trail of offshore accounts, shell companies, and ghost transactions, all quietly funneling resources into a network of forgotten properties scattered across the outskirts of Illinois and neighboring states. Safe houses. Transit points. Places designed to swallow people whole. Lamb closed his eyes. This wasn't a single lair. It was an empire of silence. Each property carefully purchased through layers of anonymity, each renovation paid in untraceable cash, each location shielded from attention by neglect and decay. Kang had been preparing for this for years. Not just to kill, but to erase. The task force split into multiple strike teams, fanning out across coordinates that pulsed across digital maps like warning beacons. Every minute carried the possibility of life or death. Every door forced open could reveal survivors, or only echoes. Hours blurred together. In a derelict farmhouse, they found blood-stained ropes and broken restraints. In a flooded basement beneath a shuttered butcher shop, they uncovered fragments of clothing, bones, and personal belongings. In a remote barn buried beneath snow, they discovered a hidden chamber with chains bolted into the beams, still warm from recent use. But no living victims. Only signs of hurried evacuation. Kang was moving his prisoners. He knew they were coming. Late afternoon. A breakthrough finally arrived from an unlikely source. An elderly mechanic, interviewed for the third time, suddenly remembered a peculiar detail: a luxury SUV frequently arriving at night to service an abandoned underground parking structure beneath an unfinished commercial tower, sealed off since the 1990s after a construction accident. A place forgotten by everyone. Except one man. Lamb felt his pulse spike. They had their final destination. The tower rose like a concrete skeleton against the dying light of evening, its upper floors jagged and unfinished, windows gaping like empty eye sockets. Police units surrounded the structure in silence, weapons ready, breath shallow. The underground entrance was concealed behind layers of rusted steel and welded barriers. It took explosives to break through. When the door finally collapsed, the air that rushed out was cold, damp, and thick with the stench of decay and disinfectant. They descended, level by level, each step echoing into the black. The underground complex stretched far deeper than any blueprint had shown, a labyrinth of reinforced corridors, soundproof chambers, and hidden rooms. This wasn't a hideout. It was a subterranean fortress. Then they heard it. A faint, desperate sound. Breathing.
Weak.
Uneven.
Human.
The officers moved faster, hearts hammering. They burst into a chamber and froze. 5 figures lay shackled to metal frames, skin pale, eyes sunken, bodies trembling. For lines fed diluted nutrients into fragile veins. Machines whispered soft mechanical rhythms, keeping the prisoners barely alive. Against all odds, they had found survivors. Medical teams surged forward. Tears blurred hardened eyes. Hope, fragile, burning, surged through the corridors. But Lamb's instinct screamed. This was too easy. Too clean. Too deliberate. His radio crackled. Inspector, we've got movement. Upper levels. One suspect fleeing. Lamb sprinted toward the stairwell, boots pounding against concrete, breath tearing through his chest. Armed officers followed, shadows racing up the spiraling staircases. Above, the unfinished floors opened into vast skeletal spaces, beams crisscrossing in chaotic geometry, dust swirling in pale shafts of dying sunlight. And then he saw him. Hong Min Kang. Running. Not panicked. Not frantic. But measured. Strategic. Every step calculated. Lamb shouted.
Kang.
Stop. Kang glanced back. For a split second, their eyes locked. And in that fleeting instant, Lamb saw it. Not fear. Not remorse. But clarity. And something far more chilling. Relief. Kang vanished behind a concrete pillar. Gunshots cracked through the hollow structure as officers fired warning shots. The echo thundered, ricocheting through the skeletal tower. Lamb pursued, heart in his throat. They burst onto the roof. Wind howled across the exposed platform, tearing at coats and hair, carrying with it the distant roar of the city far below. At the far edge, a helicopter hovered, rotors slicing the air into violent turbulence. A rope ladder swayed beneath it. Kang was meters away. So close. Lamb sprinted.
Kang.
It's over. Kang stopped. Slowly turned. The wind whipped his coat around him like a dark banner. His face was calm. Almost gentle. You're wrong, he said quietly. It's only the end of one chapter. Lamb stepped closer, gun raised, finger trembling on the trigger. You don't get to decide that. Kang smiled faintly. Oh, Inspector, I decided long ago. Then he stepped backward. Into empty air. The helicopter surged upward. The rope ladder swung wildly. Kang's hand brushed it, missed, and he disappeared into the abyss below. Silence. The roar of rotors faded. Only the wind remained. Lamb stood frozen at the edge, staring down into the darkness. Rescue teams scoured the surrounding streets and riverbanks. No body. No trace. No confirmation of death. Hong Min Kang had vanished. Again. Days later, as the rescued victims slowly regained strength in hospital wards, fragments of memory emerged, whispered accounts of endless darkness, of controlled torment, of a man who spoke softly even as he destroyed lives with surgical precision. They all described the same face, the same voice, the same calm cruelty. Yet none could explain his true motive. Revenge.
Greed. Power.
None of the conventional answers fit. Kang had not killed for pleasure. He had not killed for money. He had erased.
Systematically. Surgically.
As if following a private doctrine known only to himself. The case exploded across global headlines. Chicago 1992 cold case uncovered. Long buried secret brings chilling truth. The city reeled. Families wept. Survivors struggled to piece their shattered lives back together. And somewhere, in the unseen currents of the world, Hong Min Kang drifted beyond reach, wounded perhaps, but alive, his mind already rebuilding. Because men like him did not simply disappear. They adapted. They evolved. They waited. Late one night, long after the city had fallen asleep, Inspector Lamb received an envelope slipped beneath his apartment door. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. A dimly lit room. A steel table. A familiar red string stretched across a wall. And beneath it, written in neat, precise handwriting, "The game isn't over." Lamb closed his eyes. The hunt was far from finished. And the shadow of the cold case still loomed, patient, calculating, and deadly. The photograph lay on Inspector Lamb's kitchen table like a silent threat, its edges curling slightly under the dim yellow light. The red string in the image seemed almost alive, pulsing with implication, stretching across the wall like a network of veins feeding something monstrous. He stared at it until the details burned into his mind, until the room around him faded, until only that message remained. The game isn't over. It was not a boast. It was a promise. Lamb exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of years settle once more onto his shoulders. Hong Min Kang had vanished, but his presence had not. It lingered in every unanswered question, every half-recovered memory, every sleepless night endured by those who survived his underground prison. The case had cracked open, yet its core remained sealed, protected by layers of silence and calculation. At headquarters, the atmosphere was no lighter. The rescue of the 5 prisoners had brought a fleeting surge of hope, but it was quickly eclipsed by the realization of how vast Kang's operations truly were. The underground complex beneath the tower was only one node in a sprawling, unseen network. Each recovered hard drive revealed fragments of encrypted communications, shipping records without destinations, supply chains that ended abruptly in digital voids. Entire years of activity were still missing, swallowed by meticulous erasure. Lamb moved through the halls like a shadow, his mind racing, his instincts sharpening. He knew Kang would not simply run. A man who built empires in darkness did not abandon them easily. He restructured. He replanned. He waited for the right moment to reemerge. And somewhere, in that waiting, the truth was buried. In the hospital, the survivors began to speak. Their voices were weak, fractured, trembling under the strain of recollection. Memories surfaced in jagged shards, cold concrete floors, the hum of generators, footsteps echoing in long corridors, the faint click of locks, the sterile smell of antiseptic masking decay. They described a routine built on control, carefully measured meals, regulated sleep, timed interrogations. Their captor was always composed, always precise, never raising his voice. Kang never shouted. He whispered. And in that whisper, there was authority. One survivor, a former investigative journalist, recalled a chilling pattern. Kang did not merely imprison. He extracted information, secrets, confessions, regrets. He forced his victims to revisit moments they believed long forgotten, deals made in desperation, betrayals buried beneath years of denial, compromises justified by necessity. He recorded everything, archiving lives as if they were case files. He said the world is built on buried crimes. The journalist murmured. That society survives only because people agree to forget. He believed he was restoring balance by remembering. Lamb felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. Kang was not killing to hide secrets. He was killing to expose them, but only to himself. As analysts decrypted more of the recovered data, a disturbing pattern emerged. Many of the victims were linked not just to Kang, but to a decades-old industrial scandal involving toxic waste dumping along the Chicago River in the early 1990s. A network of corporations, officials, and private contractors had quietly disposed of hazardous materials, poisoning entire neighborhoods, triggering cancers, birth defects, and unexplained deaths. The case had been smothered by settlements, sealed records, and political pressure. It had become one of the city's forgotten wounds. Kang's father had been one of the engineers assigned to that project. He had died suddenly in 1992. Official cause: heart failure. But buried reports hinted at something darker: whistleblower threats, silenced testimony, intimidation, and ultimately, a suspicious collapse during a closed-door deposition. The timeline aligned too perfectly to ignore. Lamb's pulse quickened. This was no random crusade. This was revenge, meticulously delayed. Years earlier, Kang had disappeared from public view, resurfacing only after rebuilding himself through relentless ambition. He amassed wealth, influence, and connections, embedding himself within the very systems he despised. He learned their languages, mastered their codes, understood their vulnerabilities. And while society celebrated his success, he constructed a parallel world beneath it, one designed for judgment. Each victim had played a role in that scandal: executives who authorized dumping, officials who suppressed investigations, contractors who falsified reports, witnesses who accepted bribes, journalists who backed down, lawyers who buried evidence. And when Kang reached the limits of lawful exposure, he crossed into something far darker. He became the judge, the jailer, the executioner. Late one evening, a breakthrough sent shockwaves through the task force. Hidden deep within an encrypted archive, analysts uncovered a series of audio recordings labeled only with dates. The earliest traced back to 1992. They played the first file. A young man's voice filled the room, controlled, trembling with barely restrained fury. My father believed the truth would protect him. He believed in systems, in justice, in the law. They killed him for that belief. And now, I will dismantle everything they built to hide behind. Silence followed. Then another file. I am patient. They think time erases guilt. They are wrong. Time only sharpens it. Then another. I will make them remember. Lamb closed his eyes. This was no longer merely a cold case. It was a long-buried war. Days turned into nights. Raids multiplied. Hidden properties were seized. Underground vaults yielded bones, bloodstains, and meticulously catalogued artifacts of stolen lives. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Kang had anticipated discovery. He had designed his operations to survive his disappearance. Layers of automation continued to transfer funds, maintain properties, erase digital traces. Even in absence, he commanded motion. Then came the next message. Not to Lamb, but to the city. A video surfaced across encrypted channels, then spilled into mainstream media within hours. It showed a dim room, bare concrete walls, a single chair beneath a harsh overhead light. A silhouette stepped forward, face obscured by shadow. My name is Hong Min Kang, the voice said calmly, and I am not your enemy. I am the memory you tried to kill. The footage cut between archival news clips, suppressed documents, and recorded confessions extracted from his prisoners. The toxic dumping, the payoffs, the cover-ups. The human cost. Chicago watched in horror. The scandal erupted like a buried volcano. Public trust shattered. Protests flooded the streets. Old political dynasties collapsed overnight. Executives were arrested. Files sealed for decades were forced into the open. The city convulsed under the weight of its own forgotten sins. And yet, Kang remained unseen. Lam felt torn in two. The truth was emerging, exactly as Kang had intended. Justice, long delayed, was finally taking shape. But it came drenched in blood, driven by terror, fueled by vengeance. The lives Kang destroyed could never be restored. The suffering he inflicted would ripple outward for generations. Was this justice? Or simply another form of tyranny? Late one night, alone in the evidence room, Lam stared at the photograph once more. The red string, the steel table, the silent challenge. He realized something then. Kang didn't want to be caught. He wanted to be understood. And in that understanding lay the final danger. Because if society accepted his narrative, if his methods were excused by the enormity of past crimes, then the line between justice and brutality would vanish entirely. The world would become his echo. Somewhere far beyond Chicago, a man stood on the deck of a small cargo vessel slicing through dark water. His hair was shorter now, his beard trimmed, his face subtly altered. The city lights faded into distant glimmers behind him. In his pocket, a satellite phone vibrated. New reports. New confessions. New collapses. The system was eating itself. Kang allowed himself a slow breath. This phase was complete. But the work was endless. Because corruption, he believed, was infinite. And so was his war. As dawn rose over the city he had shattered, Inspector Lam stood once more before the evidence board. The red strings now stretched far beyond Chicago, threading into corporate empires, political networks, and international shadows. This was no longer a manhunt. It was a confrontation with a philosophy, a battle against an idea that refused to die. And somewhere, beyond borders and names, Hong Min Kang watched, waiting for the next move. The echoes of evil still vibrated in the air. Unfinished. Unforgiving. Unresolved. The night Chicago finally exhaled, it did so in fractured breaths, as if the city itself were afraid that full relief might summon the darkness back. Streets once thick with sirens fell silent. News vans packed up. Protest banners sagged under cold rain. But beneath the surface calm, something restless still stirred, coiled tightly around a single unresolved truth. Hong Min Kang was alive. Inspector Lam felt that truth in his bones. Every morning, he woke before dawn, mind already racing, replaying fragments of intercepted signals, half-finished transcripts, distorted surveillance frames. His dreams had become labyrinths of corridors and locked doors, of muffled breathing behind concrete walls, of red strings stretching endlessly into black voids. Even in rest, the hunt did not loosen its grip. The case files had outgrown their shelves. Evidence spilled across entire rooms now, entire floors. Every thread pointed outward, away from Chicago, across borders and oceans, into shell corporations, offshore shipping routes, ghost identities, and private airstrips that never appeared on public maps. Kang had dissolved himself into infrastructure. To find him now was to dismantle an entire hidden economy. And still, he communicated. Not often, not directly, but with precision. A coded phrase slipped into a darknet forum. A voice fragment hidden inside a pirated broadcast. A manipulated stock movement that collapsed a corrupt firm within hours. Each act whispered the same message. I am still here. Lam learned to read these signs the way sailors read stars. They became coordinates, not of location, but of intention. Kang was not fleeing. He was repositioning, migrating towards something larger, something that demanded patience and reach. And patience, Lam realized, was his greatest weapon. The final clue arrived in the least expected form. A dying confession. In a quiet hospice on the outskirts of the city, a former environmental compliance officer, long shielded by corporate immunity, requested to speak to the police. His lungs were failing, his voice reduced to a thin rasp, but his mind remained piercingly clear. I helped bury it, he whispered. All of it. The dumping. The bribery.
The deaths.
We told ourselves it was temporary, that the truth could wait. His fingers trembled as he pressed a folded scrap of paper into Lamb's palm. They moved the core records. Not to destroy them. To preserve them. Insurance. Leverage. A vault no one would dare touch. Lamb unfolded the note. A set of coordinates. And a name. Black Harbor. Black Harbor was not marked on any map. It did not exist in shipping registries. It was spoken of only in fragments across encrypted logistics networks, a floating data sanctuary, an offshore archive drifting constantly between jurisdictions, beyond the reach of any single authority. A digital fortress built into the skeleton of an abandoned oil platform, now repurposed into a mobile stronghold of information. If Kang wanted to reshape the world, that was where he would anchor his truth.
And perhaps
where he would finally surface. The storm struck as their vessel approached the coordinates. Waves rose like living walls, slamming against the hull with thunderous force. Wind howled through rigging, tearing spray into blinding sheets. The sea seemed intent on erasing all intrusion, guarding whatever secrets lay beneath its surface. Through the chaos, a silhouette emerged. A towering metal structure, half submerged, its skeletal frame rising from the ocean like the ribs of some ancient leviathan. Lights flickered across its platforms. Antennas bristled against the sky. Cables plunged into the depths. Black Harbor. Lamb felt a familiar tightening in his chest. This was the heart of the labyrinth. They boarded under cover of darkness. The platform was eerily silent, humming with hidden machinery. Corridors wound through reinforced steel, every surface polished to sterile perfection. Motion sensors glowed faintly. Surveillance lenses tracked every movement. This place was alive. They advanced methodically, neutralizing security systems, bypassing encrypted locks, descending deeper into the structure until they reached the central data vault. And there, Lamb finally saw him. Hong Min Kang stood alone before a towering wall of illuminated servers, his silhouette sharp against cascading streams of code. His posture was relaxed, hands folded behind his back, as though he had been waiting. "Inspector," he said softly, without turning. "You made it." Lamb raised his weapon. "It's over." Kang smiled faintly. "No," he replied. "It's complete." He turned. The man before him looked older, leaner, carved by exhaustion and resolve. Yet his eyes remained unwavering, luminous with purpose. "You hunted me across continents," Kang continued. "You dismantled everything I built. You exposed what they buried. And still, you think this ends with my arrest." Lamb stepped closer. "This ends with accountability." Kang tilted his head. "Accountability," he repeated. "For whom?" With a gesture, he activated the surrounding screens. Images exploded across them. Mass graves in poisoned neighborhoods, hospital wards packed with children born malformed, rivers thick with chemical sheen, documents stamped classified, signatures of officials who had long since died in comfort. "Justice was denied," Kang said quietly. "So, I constructed it." "You executed it," Lamb shot back. "Yes," Kang agreed. Because execution was the only language they understood. Silence stretched between them, heavy with consequence. "You could have exposed them legally," Lamb said. "You chose terror." Kang's gaze sharpened. "I chose certainty." Alarms suddenly shrieked through the platform. Emergency lights flared red. Kang's eyes flicked upward. "Your backup arrives," he murmured. "Right on schedule." Lamb's finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't move." Kang spread his hands slowly. "I won't." But even as he spoke, data began cascading across the screens. Terabytes of encrypted archives unlocking, broadcasting across international servers, flooding global networks with a full, unfiltered record of decades of corruption. "This is my final act," Kang said. "They will never bury it again." "You'll go to prison," Lamb said. "Yes," Kang replied calmly. And from there, my work will continue. Because truth, once released, cannot be recaptured. The platform shuddered as helicopters thundered overhead. Armed units stormed the corridors. Kang did not resist as they closed in. As restraints snapped around his wrists, he leaned close to Lam. You think you stopped me, he whispered. But all you did was open the door. Lam met his gaze. No, he said. I closed the one behind you. The trial became the most watched legal spectacle in modern history. Testimonies unraveled entire political dynasties. Corporations collapsed. Governments issued public apologies. Compensation funds surged into communities poisoned for generations. Yet for every wound exposed, 10 more surfaced. The world realized how vast the buried machinery of corruption truly was. And in the center of it all stood one man, silent, unrepentant, his mission complete. Hong Min Kang was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. No appeals. No leniency. No escape. Years passed. Chicago healed slowly, imperfectly. New leaders rose. New safeguards were written into law. And yet, in quiet corners of the internet, fragments of Kang's philosophy endured. Anonymous movements formed, inspired by his relentless exposure of injustice. They did not kill, but they watched. They documented. They waited. The shadow he cast refused to fade. One evening, long after the trial, Inspector Lam stood alone by the river, watching the city lights ripple across dark water. The same river once poisoned by secrets now flowed cleaner, though its depths still held echoes. He thought of the victims, of the survivors, of the families who would never receive answers, and of a man who had transformed grief into a weapon sharp enough to carve history. Justice, Lam realized, was not a destination. It was a constant pursuit, fragile and flawed, forever balanced between light and shadow. Behind him, the city breathed. Ahead, the river stretched endlessly. And somewhere in a maximum security cell, Hong Min Kang stared into his own reflection, knowing that even in confinement, the world he had shattered would never fully escape his reach. The cold case was closed, but its echo would never truly end.